Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, a sprinkling of philosophy, organizing psychology, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. It's unfortunate that Kareem couldn't be here today, but we're kind of doing part two of what we did last time, which was power dynamics. But I thought what would be good for the second part is, well, talk about power dynamics.
Yep.
Just as a broad thesis of what we'll discuss today, you can kind of talk about, how do across the political spectrum, how do we handle power dynamics, and then kind of bleed into how the culture war has kind of come upon us, especially in the world of social media, and how do we fight against that? Because really, in your streams and what we've been talking about for, oh God, could it be like the last 6 months? Like, how long do you think we've been talking about it?
Yeah, pretty much. If not more. But yeah, let's go with 6 months.
It's quite obvious from events such as, let's take Australia Day, Invasion Day. I'll say it until I'm blue in the face, but that is the original culture war when it comes to Australia. Like, oh, do you change the date or do we keep the date as it is? Oh, but shouldn't we be patriotic? Oh, but shouldn't we mourn the loss of the Indigenous people? Like, it's been so captured by the social media that, like, it's just polarizing. And, like, let me just use, like, one term that that is part of Kareem's, Gemini report, which, like, we'll make sure to share it. And I know I've already shared it in the Discord, but that sort of analysis, like, let's use that thing that I just used, like the culture war with Australia Day, like that whole culture war thing is what the report refers to as affected polarization, which is like, just quote unquote, the distinct psychological phenomena where political or social identification devolves into profound emotional animosity towards the other. So, I'm my camp, you're your camp. Let's just scream across the void that is social media, and drive up the engagement for social media rather than having a rational discussion. Because I think everyone reasonably intentioned walks into a discussion thinking, like, oh, I'm a rational person. I have my talking points. They'll have their talking points. We'll just discuss things, and that'll be that. But that's not how comment sections work, and that's not how the algorithm tries to drive up subscribers and drive up views for certain content.
And so what's your thesis here for us? Why are we talking about social media polarization specifically? How does this relate to the power dynamic that we were talking about? Because last episode, we spent a lot of time talking about manipulation and power based on what is the origin of power. And we talked a bit about the idea of class power and who owns the important segments of the economy, and like how that distinction is what gives people power. And we were debating a lot about, like, the idea of freedom and, like, whether or not it matters if people own stuff or not, and all these dynamics. And, like, my thesis was definitely, out of the last discussion that we had, was power is actually derived economically, and those who own the ways of producing all of the value that we need in society to reproduce ourselves as a society and as individuals actually own the power. And so, like, I feel, and, like, this is something that we talked about in the stream today, is that in order for a ruling class, a group that are the haves versus the have-nots, they are able to use particular tools in their arsenal to ideologically, not physically, but ideologically almost suppress the subordinate class and keep them subordinate, maintain the status quo. And one of those ideological tricks is the culture wars. They actually purposefully stoke culture wars among the masses, among the producer class,
Yes.
the have-nots. They intentionally stoke culture war issues which are meaningless for them ultimately, but like work to divide and conquer. So like there's no unity in the masses of the producing class out there, the lower classes, the working classes. There's no real unity because they fight on what's left and right of this issue, what's progressive and conservative on this issue. And so like it's an actual tool of power dynamics, the culture wars itself, the polarization of social media that you were speaking about before.
Yeah, but okay. Then what my broad thesis, at least for today, that I wanted to discuss was, well, our current environment, especially our current online political environment, interacts with manipulation and power dynamics quite a lot. Because, like, let's take the power dynamics that we were kind of discussing, like, last week. Let's take a huge moral gripe of, say, somebody who is a leftist or a Marxist, as an example, and then somebody who would be classified as, say, a conservative or a libertarian. Like, the big gripe that, say, a leftist would say is, okay, the ruling class talk about the mode of production and who actually owns that economic power, and a majority of their analysis was kind of focused on that. So, ergo, focusing on the ruling class, and then the other side of the apparent political spectrum, the conservative or libertarian would be talking about corruption and talking about the elites and how, you know, hey, they're messing up society and our institutions, and they probably are viewing institutions as sacred to the social contract within society. And their gripe is with the elites, the cathedral, like whatever term you want to use for them. But they're both, I guess, have gripes with the similar ruling class, elites, whatever you want to call them. But what actually ends up happening is social media, because of its views, because it wants to get subscribers and all of that, the mechanisms and the algorithm, what ends up happening is you have the right side of politics dunking on the punching bag of the left, which is the liberals, and, you know, poking fun at X, Y, and Z. Then you have the left using the punching bag that is conservatives, and you're almost creating a caricature because of that us and them mentality. Because what I found interesting about the Gemini report is it was talking about this idea of parochial altruism, which is basically you have a love for your in-group and you disdain the out-group. And it kept on talking about this idea of a soldier mentality. So rather than talking about ideals, talking about what you want from society and making a rational argument for them, you're kind of digging in the trenches and you're defending your position. And hey, even you might have a more extreme position than you would hold in ordinary day life. And what ends up happening is it's like you're driving along the road and you see another car cut in front of you and you start yelling at the car, not realizing that there's a person in the car. And you normally wouldn't talk to them like that. And it ends up being a screaming match rather than a rational debate that we would normally consider in our heads. And rather than you having a rational debate where you set up premise 1, 2, and 3 and have a conclusion, you have a screaming match about, oh, you're a immoral person, and I'm right and you're wrong, which is never going to bring society together. It's going to make things more divisive. So that's kind of my overarching thing that I want to talk about today. I feel like
Mm.
there are plenty examples of manipulation, polarization, and caricature discussion of power dynamics
Mm.
that, look, we as a society have a long way to go to kind of, uh, let's say, inoculate ourselves from this.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's really interesting because I was speaking to someone today in the stream and they were bringing up this idea of, has it always been like this? Have we always had such intensive culture wars? And like, I'm getting the notion from what you're talking about that the culture wars as we perceive them today, that the polarization of politics and society is accentuated by social media and the echo chambers that we live in. And like, as you described nicely before, we're kind of yelling into the void almost in comment sections and against people we find as our tribal enemy. And to what avail? And like, I think it was interesting because I saw this analysis that somebody made about what politics was like, or the culture wars was like in the 50s and the 60s, at the turn of the war, at the end of the war. And, it was the political divide really in that era of the 20th century had more to do with where, if you were conservative or progressive, left or right wing, what really delineated your differences on the political spectrum were economic. So if you were liberal or progressive, you kind of believed in a progressive tax rate and you didn't mind government spending on social services, for instance, or public infrastructure works. And then if you were conservative, then like you wanted to make sure there wasn't frivolous government spending and inflation was in control. And you wanted to regulate fiscal policies. So, the economy was managed by appropriate persons. And like somewhere between then and now, the culture wars have developed well beyond what's effective monetary or financial policy. Well beyond that. And like, I'm not suggesting that this is something that's a new phenomenon. There's always been differences in opinions on like the right or the left spectrum and all that sort of stuff. And there's always been culture war issues, like weaponizing kind of, racial matters, or matters got to do with kind of gender equality, like, should women vote or not? Like, those have always been big cultural issues in politics. So it extends beyond just economic stuff. But like those type of issues, I find, like, whether you fund police or not, whether you support abortion, whether you think gays should get married, like all this type of stuff has become more and more intensive from, I would say, potentially the 80s onwards, as political parties started to understand that you could actually draw more voters, like swing voters, or voters from your enemy, your opponent, if you were able to wedge in certain issues that they weren't able to defend, or look like they had a strong stance on, just like I said, to scalp voters from them. And so politics started to become a game of like skirmishes on the fringes, as opposed to like policy debate. Became skirmishes on the fringes on cultural issues that nobody wanted to touch, or you could get your opponent to look weak on, so you could steal some of their voters for the next election. And then that has now, in the surveillance capitalist age, which I am starting to develop more and more of an understanding of, where I know we've only been speaking about it for years now, but like I'm starting to understand that, like, how crucial are the means of production that are available under a surveillance capitalist society in terms of producing the power dynamic that we're talking about here, which is reproducing the capitalist class dynamic, the ruling class versus everybody else, the capitalist class versus the many workers of the world. How that power dynamic is reproduced in the surveillance capitalist world And like if the surveillance capitalist world, the information space is completely controlled, not now by legacy media outlets like mainstream media outlets, and things of that sort, but like by algorithms, as you've said before, that 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 plonk you into an echo chamber, and then you like, you know, not just yelling into the void, but you're basically yelling into a into a device that just repeats your thinking points and doubles you down on your own rhetoric, as opposed to exposing you, as you were talking about, to any new ideas, or even having those ideas tested to see if they hold any weight or any substance. If the way that our information spaces are created now and curated now is by, as you described, a machine that learns what we prefer and what keeps us engaged for long enough, so we stay on the platform and potentially can get fed more ads or consume more content, and even have our behavior modified to do other things of that nature, to be better consumers, then like in that type of environment, it's no longer people just getting involved in politics because they want to get involved in politics, or they feel strongly about this cultural issue that they've heard and they want to debate. It's because that's actually part of some sophisticated mechanism that keeps them in the digital world long enough for them to be, like I said, better consumers. And so like we are manipulated by forces now that modify our behavior in real time and trap us using polarization to keep us online perpetually, almost, to keep us from touching grass and to keep us from doing anything else but like potentially spending our money on a particular platform over another platform. And it's like, you know, it's very addictive stuff. It's not called doom scrolling for no reason. And so is the power dynamic in a world that is full of culture wars, is the power dynamic not just, hey, let's stoke the culture wars to keep them fighting each other, but also let's stoke the culture wars because it's incredibly profitable as well. Not just reinforces the class relation and allows us to stay on top, but it's also profitable because the more frenzied they get and polarized they get, the more they will stay online and potentially consume what we give them. And that's another reinforcing of the dynamic that goes beyond just stoking culture wars for the sake of keeping people angry and fighting each other. That reproduces the class system in the sense that it not only allows them to stay on top, but it allows them to extract value from it at the same time. It's a compounding that I don't even know if we've experienced before yet. And the 21st century, thus, is one scary place for us in terms of that power dynamic.
Well, it's the reason why I use the car analogy, because it's exactly the same. You know, you're driving along a road and somebody cuts you off in traffic, and you're much likely to like yell at them since you see them as a vehicle rather than the person. And hey, our computers, our phones are exactly the same way now.
Yes.
And it is addictive. Like, I think we're much more prone to beat that person in an argument, and that's. See, this is the funny thing I find about online debates now, and now is that, look, I feel like the original concepts of, like, it kind of extends from the Socratic dialogue, and, you know, hey, like, Hegel's idea of things of, like, you have a synthesis, you have an antithesis, and you have a hypothesis. You have one idea, an opposing idea, and then you have a synthesis of those two things. But what really happens on your modern debates is you'll have a superficial contradiction, or you'll have like a gotcha here or a gotcha there. Like for example, some of the ones that I find annoying whenever you see um, in online comments on videos is, oh well, if socialism is so successful, tell me a successful socialist regime, or like it's like the little gotchas rather than actually discussing what is, like what exactly do you mean by successful? Like was that really the goal of the 19th or the 20th century? Like what I found, if we truly were having a rational debate, is I think what's important is the questions you ask as well as the answers that you give. But the algorithm doesn't want that from you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for the algorithm if you make an idiot of yourself or you make an idiot of the other person. It's takes those views, it takes that consumption, and it says, well, thank you for your data, on your way, slave, and that's each of the transaction. Like it really doesn't care about facts, let alone care about your feelings, as long as you consume.
And so, like, how would you, because you are the resident expert in this, how would you say that this relates to Foucault and his understanding of the power of the institution? How would you relate this social media age, this surveillance capitalist age now? How would you apply a Foucault understanding to, the architecture of surveillance capitalism?
Well, if you kind of look at, say, like some of his major concepts, like relating to Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon and his kind of analysis on power and institutions, look, I kind of feel like it's the final recognition of his idea of power within institutions. Because I kind of feel like Foucault takes Hobbes and the Leviathan to the nth degree, because he talks about, because obviously Hobbes talks about these social contracts and the state of nature and all of that, but like Foucault, and like this is what was quite interesting that I read in Susan Neiman's book, Left Does Not Equal Woke, is that it was funny. It's interesting because he was actually extremely anti-colonialist. Like he was very much for indigenous populations. But that part I actually didn't know at all. But what I found, what I find interesting about Foucault with what topic we're kind of discussing today is, well, the whole idea about power and institutions, especially prison system, which he kind of discusses in Discipline and Punish, is any discussion of punishment, justice, all of that, it's kind of the figures or the leaders, the politicians or anything like that. There's always going to be an inevitable grab for power. So any idea of justice is subservient to power. So all you really have to do is make your power grab more efficient. And I think the social media is the panopticon of people's attention. So it's really the surveillance capitalists are just being efficient in their capture of people's attention and the capture of people's dynamics. And really, when we hit the agree to the service terms and conditions for them to take our data, and they had the means of production, they had the capabilities in order to have the power grab. They just were efficient about it. And I feel like he would say it's an extension of how our institutions already function, because like a lot of what Foucault talks about is that they've just become like, okay, you back in the 17th century, you would have been hung, drawn, and quartered for you to comply with the punishments of those days, like whether that was during the pirate era or the Enlightenment era. But now you have the police in order to enforce private property and all of that if you step out of line. It's like, the institutions are subtle until they don't need to be. But even more than that, whether it's now a phoenix rising of the institution of social media, if you will, it's just a much more pernicious and efficient way of subjugating people or displaying power by the surveillance capitalists. Like, yeah. I'm kind of melding a lot of different ideas that Foucault talks about and kind of relating it to the topic, and it's very broad strokes, but that's how I kind of feel like he would relate it to things.
And so would you say then that social media in that regard is not simply just a vehicle for perpetuating the polarization that comes out of the culture wars, but is also a vehicle of institutional control in and of itself? Because, like, traditional media doesn't follow you everywhere. Like, if you used to buy a newspaper or something like that, you pick it up and put it down at your leisure. Yeah, it's feeding you propaganda and somebody else's story and making you consume and change your mind, or it's like melding your mind to a certain narrative that is produced by someone like, Rupert Murdoch over there or something like that. But like social media, in a sense, is like, as it adapts, because it's kind of, it's reactive and it works off feedback as well. Like it's following you around at all times. And as you said before, like, it's addictive too. Like, some people can't go like, minutes without being like, I better just check my phone, kind of thing. And then they find themselves caught in a doom scroll again for like 10 minutes before they realize they've even picked up their phone. Do you see that social media, and like, when I say social media, I do try to encompass a lot more than just social media apps, but like maybe even apps generally that keep you on and keep you going, like capture your attention, as you were saying before, the attention economy. Do you feel like they are agents of institutional control now themselves? Like the very fact that we have these tracking devices almost on us that we freely carry of our own volition. Remember, like, people used to think back in the day of like dystopian societies where we were being kind of tracked by Big Brother, and like we all had like a chip inserted into our neck or something like that, and we were all plugged into a simulation somehow. We had no free will and but we actually carry these things with us because they're just a good consumer item and we've been trained to have them. Like, do you find these things to be part of the institution of control in that regard?
Okay, you know what? Let me make a hot take. Let's, because it's funny that you bring up, well, I feel like your reference there was to 1984, correct?
Yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah, so
of that nature.
Let me make a hot take. I kind of feel like, I just want to say that social media, at least in its current form, and the negativity bias, whether it's in news or, hey, in a comment section where you're fighting with someone about, and then like near the end of it, the extreme positions that both of you have taken, do you actually believe that or not? Or were you just trying to dunk on the other person and win the debate? Like, my hot take is, I wonder if social media is George Orwell's reality of the 5-minute hate. So yeah, the screaming into the void of your opposition, like as a left person, fuck that conservative, and them being immoral and being completely inconsistent with what they say. Oh, me as a as a conservative saying fuck that liberal because you know it's quite obvious that their communist governments are all corrupt and they never done anything good and they've killed millions and millions of people. Like it's that kind of online debating and how it is. It's the in reincarnation. Sorry, not the reincarnation. The development, the phoenix rising of George Orwell's 5 Minute Hate, where yes, it is an institution of power because it does its job quite well, that it's quite divisive and it's taking extreme caricatured examples of what the other side is rather than you you looking at the people that are controlling these devices and might be manipulating you. And hey, like a classic case is happening right now where we've had all those Epstein files released and we've realized just how interconnected the ruling class is right now. But what is happening? We're so addicted to social media that we're so busy fighting amongst ourselves where if we're not careful, especially since the authorities have come out and said, hey, we've released the files like we said, but we're not really going to prosecute anyone. Have a nice day. If we're not careful, they'll say that. Everyone will look at the Epstein files. They'll be shocked about how many people are in that, and everyone will get along with their day. That sounds like a pretty neat institution of control, if you're asking me.
Very. So as in, like they can control the narrative now, the public conversation with such ease or sophistication that like things that would typically be rather controversial and worthy of days upon days, if not weeks, of constantly being in the headlines and scrutinized by the broad mass of the population, are things that can be switched on and off with relative ease. Is that what you mean?
But not only that, like let's take a YouTube reel or an Instagram reel or something like that where we've trained our let's take Joe Blog, who's so used to doom scrolling on those reels and TikTok and all of that, where he used to be so good at reading books and like reading an hour at a time, and then he's gotten so used to the reels where he's viewing something for a minute and then he goes on to the next thing and goes on to the next thing. Hey, that's that dopamine hit. That dopamine hit has programmed him so much that the Epstein files turn up and he goes, oh shit, like that's absolutely fucked. I can't believe that happened. And like he investigates the next thing, but then in 2 weeks' time, because he's been so used to that Instagram or to TikTok reel of ways of thinking, he just naturally moves on to the next thing of what the news is, rather than critically analyzing X, Y, and Z. We've been trained to just very easily move on to the next thing that we're not even thinking about what we're doing. Like, don't get me wrong, I've done a very like a caricatured person. I'm not saying that everyone is like that, but we've inbuilt these zombie machinations into how we do things, but for the Lord and Savior algorithm, that I feel like we're much more primed to move on to the next thing rather than stopping and thinking and being like, wait, is this big news, or is this a big thing that we should be concentrating for X amount of period? Should I be reaching out to my representative? Should I be organizing to because this situation is fucked, and go from there? Like, rather than just staring at my screen. Like, I'm not saying everyone acts like that, but if we've got an environment where you've got a propensity to act like that, then hey, I'm sure the surveillance capitalists would be completely fine with you acting like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon that you've described. It's like, uh, it's not only the fact that we are surrounded and bombarded by so much information now that people don't know kind of where to poke a stick, or what to poke a stick at, but also the fact that because we're just generally in an environment with so much information that is curated by an algorithm that feeds us things that try to maintain our eyeballs and our attention, and maximize as much as possible. Something that is significant and newsworthy might give you just another dopamine hit, and just enough to keep you going, like any other piece of interesting content would. And you're completely desensitized to the gravity of anything, because, oh wow, that was shocking, but then like 2 seconds later and a minute later you're looking for your next dopamine hit from another interesting piece of content. And so like we're losing our ability to hold significant issues in our mind's eye, to be able to act on them, as you've suggested, like take action, like in the real world, like, reach out to our elected official or what have you, or organize around an issue, because like, oh wow, that is pretty crazy, isn't it? I wonder what else there is. And like, you just go back to kind of swiping away. That is a really scary prospect for IS, like what you're talking about there. That like, in the hecticness, the craziness that is the social media landscape, and the bombardment of information that we get through a digital age, that like we're actually going to lose the ability to kind of consider how important things are, because like they will be important, but like for seconds potentially, and then they're lost in the sea of like eye-catching dopamine hit curated content that is just meant to wow you for like 15 seconds until you scroll away onto something else. That is an incredibly crazy realization. And I would say that that's even kind of like that's directly related to kind of the way that politics has been done now since the Trumpian era as well. It's no surprise, I think that it's also been something that's happened concurrently. The Trumpian era, that is, has happened concurrently with the rise of social media. But like, there's the concept from kind of Steve Bannon as a political strategist, that is used by the Trump administration of both terms, which is flooding the zone.
Yeah.
And like, you also like, maybe there is important stuff to do, or there's an important issue, but if you just like spray everyone with heaps of different things so they can let's say, be offended by, they won't know which one to take so seriously. Like, one of them could be extremely significant, but like, because you've just given them like 4 things to worry about, they spread themselves across analyzing 4 things instead of analyzing one that really is important and should be given the hours, the days, the weeks that it takes to analyze what it is that you should be pissed off about. They just hit you up with like 5 things all at once, and then you're just like, ugh. Like, after Venezuela, the Americans were straight onto Greenland, straight onto Iran, and like straight onto kind of
Cuba.
Cuba, and ramping up all of this, like this rhetoric would like to make the Europeans uncomfortable, to make the Canadians uncomfortable, like all this sort of stuff. Like, it was just all bang, 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 bang. And like, people could have just been angry about one thing, like like Venezuela, and they could have
Mm.
sustained their anger at what had happened to Venezuela for a long time, and people could have just kept analyzing how ridiculous that was. But like, as soon as they'd done that, then they were off, and the Europeans were shaking in their boots about the prospect of losing NATO because Trump wants, some action in Greenland, and so on and so forth. And so, like, it's kind of interesting how, like, the political sphere or politics in the Trumpian era is reflective of the way that social media kind of functions. And that's just like another mechanism of power and control, I guess you would say. Because, like, they can get away with all of their stuff if they flood the zone. Because, like, people don't know which one to resist first. And do they have the energy even to spread themselves and resist across multiple issues at a time?
Yeah, because this is like the burning question that I have, say, with being here in 2026 compared to, say, something like the 60s or the 70s. Like, I guess this is a hypothetical, but if you had something like the Epstein files and you just dropped them into everyone's lap in the 60s or the 70s, like, those kind of especially sections of the population that were quite radicalized and organized, would they have stood for something like that? Like, I'm sure they honestly, I feel like the American government in the Vietnam War is probably still reeling with how everyone protested that. So I don't think in that kind of hypothetical scenario, the organized, or at least the radicalized elements of society would have stood for something like the Epstein files. Because, like I said, there's a real risk that we'll hear about it, we'll be shocked, and then what are we going to have for dinner?
Yeah.
Like, I'm being facetious,
yeah,
but
yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fair call. Like, I would think that if something with the gravity, the controversy of the Epstein files had dropped in the 60s as opposed to now, like, it would have ended, like, governments. Like, it would have destabilized governments, kind of thing.
Mm.
And, like, people would have basically, been up in arms and in the streets about it. But now it's just another subset of the culture wars, really, isn't it? It really is. Like, it's really funny because, like, it's the MAGA types that were calling for blood. And they basically elected, one of the main issues they elected Trump on was, like, releasing the files kind of thing. And now the files are released, everyone's just like, oh, those same people that were calling for blood before, now it's released and implicating their supreme leader. They're kind of like, I don't know. It's not that bad, is it? Like, they're not questioning it as much. Like, they're not in the streets demanding, get with their guillotines out, looking to eat the rich or something like that, which is like a fair response, given the fact that some of the reports are literally the other way around. Like, it's rich people out eating people from the working classes and stuff like that.
But this also links back to that kind of parochial altruism that I was mentioning before, is that with this level of tribalism, look, everyone has their blind spots. Like, their core values that, hey, if you were shown for it not to be true, it would rock you to the core, and it would be understandable if it took you at least a long time to come around to it. But I just think in this social media environment, if you are MAGA and then suddenly Trump goes, yeah, but I was exaggerated by the files. I wasn't in the files. I'm sure it's quite easy for you to turn around and say, well, he said he's not in the files. I'm he mustn't be in the files. And then somebody very reasonably turns around to you and says, "Oh yeah, but have you read the files?" And you go, "Oh no, I haven't. I would never read them." Like, especially if we have these defense mechanisms in our head, especially the social media related ones that that they kind of protect us and dial us into the us versus them mentality. That, like I said before, you become the soldier where you're digging in the trenches, and it doesn't matter the reality of the situation, because if people are honest, hey, you get some things right, you get some things wrong, and really life is somewhere in the middle between two perspectives. But as soon as you're thrown into a debate or a war situation, then it doesn't matter what the other side is saying, as long as you shore up your side of the argument. And it totally makes sense that I'm sure the other side thinks you're being stupid, or you're being unreasonable, you're being irrational, but you kind of don't care because you feel love for your group, and you're going to do anything for them. It's trying to tap your way outside of this mentality. That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, how do you escape the tribalism that is prearranged for you in the culture wars? That, I think, is like the real difficulty of the 21st century, in a world and landscape where social media does dictate to you what your tribe is and tries to fit you into an echo chamber that like kind of reinforces your worldview. How do you escape that and recreate an echo chamber that is built not on cultural issues but on class issues? And then you can curate your own. You can get your algorithm to kind of curate you a culture war less echo chamber, and one that promotes only your class interests for some reason. If people are making content in that regard, which I think there is a lot of content that would just talk about like kind of class-based issues as opposed to culture war issues. But like you have to be able to remove yourself from, like I said, your own echo chamber, like pull yourself outside the culture wars and then train your algorithm accordingly. Like it's a thing. Like if we live in a surveillance capitalist world and we live with social media and algorithms, we actually have to learn how to navigate this territory responsibly and not just lay blame to corporations that prey off using us in the attention economy. Like at the end of the day, like as evil as the tobacco corporations were for addicting people and getting them to smoke cigarettes, if you wanted to quit smoking cigarettes, like you have to take the first step to quit smoking cigarettes. Like they, the governments regulated them and clamped down on their predatory behavior, but they didn't completely cut them off so no one could buy cigarettes anymore. You can still buy cigarettes. And so, you have to take a certain level of responsibility. I think one of the tricks of living in the social media age in the 21st century, let's say, is actually learning how to tame your own algorithm then. And if you go on Instagram and it's profiled you as a male and you're 25 to 35 or something like that. And so it shows you pictures of bikini clad women and you touch that and it classifies you with, a majority of other men who are 25 to 35 in that particular demographic and that cluster, because that's how it works. It works in clusters. Then you click it once and it's going to perpetually show you the same sort of images and reiterations of that style of imagery and content, because it thinks that it's going to hook you on that. It's going to hook you in and keep you on the platform for longer. But if you press it once and then you never give it attention ever again, no matter how many times it suggests it to you in your feed, eventually the algorithm's going to be like, oh shit, as successful as this is with everybody else, in that age bracket that is male and heterosexual. It's not working anymore with this person. Maybe I'll have to do something else. And so, like, if your feed is full of, like, you know, chicks in bikinis and fishing content and, like, sporadically, you know, political stuff from your specific echo chamber, it's not just the evil corporation that's done that to you, but it's a reflection of your doom scrolling behavior. And so, to a certain extent, you actually have to take responsibility for that. And you can train your algorithm. You can definitely train your and curate your algorithm. And so, if you want to exist on social media, which I don't think is really an option now in the surveillance capitalist era, I don't think you can really get away from interacting with social media at all. And dare I say, you shouldn't anyway. Social media isn't in and of itself inherently evil, but the people that own that means of production, own those algorithms, do use it for their own profit and their own exploitative agendas, let's say. You need to know how to be a responsible user, because the culture wars are real. And if the culture wars were about dividing us to help control us, in the surveillance capitalist age, as we've discussed, they're not just about dividing us to control us, so they're also being used to control us via complete and utter capture now, and like complete capture of our whole existence. We spend all of our time online and a sucker to the algorithm. Like, you have to learn how to then train your own algorithm. I think that is actually a responsibility then of an intelligent user. Is like, don't let it control you. You must teach it. Teach it to serve you, essentially.
Well, actually, to be honest, what you were talking is one of the strategies, or at least the mindsets that you need to have. Like in the Gemini report, what you were just talking about is one of the mindsets you need to have when to kind of deplug yourself away from the culture war mentality. So basically, it talks about training in what it calls intellectual humility. So just as a quote from the Gemini report, that it is defined as the recognition that one's beliefs may be incorrect and the willingness to revise them in light of new evidence has been, and this has been linked to reduce effective polarization and increased willingness to engage with opposing views. This is linked to the scout mindset. So, the scout mindset, seeking truth, versus the soldier mindset, so defending a position, is a trainable cognitive framework. Studies suggest that even brief interventions that prompt users to consider accuracy or cultivate a scout orientation can reduce the sharing of misinformation and lower partisan hostility. So accuracy nudges, I think later on it was talking about how, Twitter and X, I don't think this is part of it anymore, but there was this thing called community notes, where what would happen is you had a piece of content and it would rate the accuracy of something, but it kind of prompted people on the political spectrum as to whether something was accurate or not. It wouldn't consider a correction of things, like, you know, like thumbs up, thumbs down, like just a random comment here and there. You had to try and be as balanced as possible, or like opposing views are linked to that. I think if I can try and find it, where was it? There's accuracy nudging. Sorry. Okay, here. Sorry about that. So, accuracy nudges are simple prompts asking to rate the accuracy of a headline before sharing it. which have been proved to significantly, which have been shown to significantly improve the quality of shared content. The accuracy nudge works for shifting attention from social validation. So, will people like this to the truth? Is this accurate? So, like that kind of community notes, it kind of prompted, like whether it was a comment or whether it was a scale of a certain accuracy, it kind of prompted you to give a much more balanced view. And what actually found is that rather than constant retweeting or resharing of things, which therefore prompted more misinformation or more polarized views, you had to stop and think, and it actually encouraged both sides of the aisle to kind of agree on a point. And unless you did that, that view or that statement of accuracy just wasn't considered. I think I have the thing here that talks to it specifically, but I'm sure people can kind of read it in their own time because we'll include it in the show notes. But yeah, like there was one thing, like there's two directions that I kind of want to finish this conversation on, because I kind of ducked in and out of the stream you had recently with Parenti and the culture struggle. So I'm actually curious as to whether you could go into what he discussed about the culture war in his own time. But not only that, there's another direction that we can kind of go in, which is we can discuss like other mechanisms apart from intellectual humility as to how to kind of plug yourself away from culture war mentality. I don't know, which one do you feel more appealing?
Well, like in the idea of continuing Parenti's legacy, R.I.P. Parenti, let's just go with what he had to say about the culture wars, which I found rather interesting. And like the culture war, like culture isn't something that everybody agrees on. Like when somebody says to you, "Oh, you can't do that because it's going to offend my culture," it's kind of running under the assumption that everyone in that particular culture is unified, actually. And there might be a lot of people inside that culture that actually don't agree with it. Like if you speak to Americans kind of thing, and they say, you know, they define what American culture is, not all of them agree that they like all aspects of American culture, for example. And so culture isn't something that is infallible and untouchable. It's something that is created by people and different subsets within a particular community. And so, yeah, in a shortened version of it, I guess you would say culture is not only something that is completely changeable and potentially changeable on a whim, depending on how people feel and react to something. It is something that is thus subordinate to or secondary to what are, for a free society anyway, for a liberal society, culture is subordinate to what we would consider to be basic human rights. Like you can't have culture unless you have humans. So if you don't have humans that are able to reproduce themselves because they've got basic human rights covered, like the right to freely express themselves, you won't have culture if they can't freely express themselves or speak freely.
Right.
They won't be, unless they are able to freely associate with one another, move in public spaces, and not fear repression from the state or some arbitrary authority. You don't have culture, or you don't have a free and organic culture anyway. But like more fundamental than that, if you don't have basic human rights like the, right to a dignified existence in terms of right to food, housing, and energy, like, all of the stuff that we need in the 21st century, like electricity, water, sanitation, Like if you don't have access to these basic necessities that allow us to subsist in the first place at a suitable level that is expected of life in industrial society in the 21st century, then you don't even have room for culture because you won't have any people. And so like the culture wars, as important as they potentially are, the cultural struggle, as he called it, and like while it has real objective consequences, it's not the be all and end all, and it is not something that should take precedence over our civil rights and our basic inalienable human rights. So I thought that was rather interesting and a good point to ground us when it comes to thinking about culture war issues. Because I find the pushback that I get sometimes when I tell people to not focus on the culture wars and focus only on the class war or something like that is like the pushback that I get is like, oh, well, what are you saying, that culture wars aren't important? Huh? Like, I think it's very important if I fight against racism or fight against et cetera, or fight for, for human life or something like that. Yeah, okay, that is important, and these things are important, but like at the end of the day, you should be fighting for something that systematically improves your most basic human rights and everybody's by extension, instead of getting lost in an ever perpetuated culture war that is used to control you, and as we have explored, capture you. So that's what I would take away from Parenti 4AS.
Well, look, and I kind of feel like with the strategies that the Gemini report goes into, it kind of agrees with what Parenti had to say, because you need strategies to kind of unplug yourself from the inevitable way the attention economy tries to suck you in. It sucks you into the cultural talking points that it wants to talk to you about, not develop organic culture talking points, if that makes sense. Which I feel like is what you were saying, right? With Parenti's. And like, for example, like one of the strategies the report talks about is superordinate goals. So it describes it as, rather than face-to-face discussions, it's shoulder-to-shoulder interactions. So it uses this idea of the Robert Cave experiment, where you had like a rival group of boys that ceased hostilities when they were forced to work together to fix a broken water supply truck. And it kind of goes in, if you have like a grand plan. So I don't know, something like FDR and reconstructing America, the world after a world war, then that would be classified as a superordinate goal. That sort of grand thing that transcends a culture war, where people have an ultimate goal that they kind of work towards. Look, I've mentioned it many times in streams, and I am serious about it. The other one that it mentions is citizens' assemblies, or what it calls as mini publics. So whilst this is challenging on scalability, which, hey, I'll go into, there's apparently a Taiwan model that can actually scale this up, but you getting representatives, or you getting like a select number of people, say from a lottery or something, and you going in and discussing in a structured way the issue that you want to discuss, that ends up creating a situation where it creates a lot of agreement between people in that kind of citizens' assembly idea of things. So robust discussions in a what he calls sortation, which is the random selections to create the representatives that go into the citizens' assembly. Um, that ends up being a representation of the population, and you actually discussing the different points of view and then coming to an agreement. That has been great and solved a lot of issues in society. So one of the things it brings up is the Irish Citizens Assembly, when it was, and this was a heavily Catholic nation, when discussing like constitutional referendums, and I think it was going into the same sex marriage debates and that sort of thing. Like Ireland was able to go forth with recommendations as to what the government should do based on these citizen assemblies. And it kind of goes into a whole bunch of other examples. But what I found quite interesting was what I said before about the V Taiwan and Polis, well, which is basically a platform that you can read on the Gemini report, but they're able to kind of scale up these mini publics or these citizens' assemblies where the algorithm, rather than you facing off against each other, it gives you the questions or the arguments that you're supposed to be discussing, and it's able to mediate and facilitate these citizens' assemblies in a structured way. And hey, like apparently for Taiwan, when it was discussing Uber and anti-Uber groups and how they should structure regulations and all of that in the country, they ended up not only reaching a consensus, but bringing a consensus that the Taiwanese people wanted for their regulations of Uber. So rather it being a straight Uber versus the taxi drivers, these digital citizens assemblies were able to reach a consensus, which, hey, I'm sure that's a great thing. And there's a number of other things that kind of go in the Gemini report, but hey, that's at least a decent start if you kind of are able to tap into the organizing or the tools are surrounding. And this is another thing, like it's a constant thing that you have to do, because the algorithm, how it currently functions, it decays and you go back into your old way of thinking pretty much straight away. Like I think the report was talking about like what it was like a backfire effect or the decay problem. So say you do intellectual humility, or you are part of these citizens assemblies where, hey, you get a good indication, or you get a good discussion with other people, and you view other people as thinking and human beings. If you're not constantly, I guess, working that humility muscle, or working towards a better ideal or a better future in these kind of non-culture wars contexts, like within a couple of weeks or within a month, you'll go back to your old way of thinking because the algorithm is so strong. It's almost you have to constantly work at these things in order to fight the culture war mentality. So, look, I'm not going to lie, it's an upward battle, but the tools and the structures are out there if we want to be serious about fighting the culture wars. And the last segment of today, which is That's a Web Art. What do you think the prompt for this one was, MysterE?
It's a board of surveillance capitalists thinking about how they can further capture the world's populations with a bit more of that spicy culture war.
Okay, so the prompt for today was power dynamics and forming citizen assemblies to practice intellectual humility from all citizens in society.
Of course, it's a citizens' assembly. I should have guessed. I should have guessed.
Okay. And with that, thank you everyone for joining today. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, MysterE.
Thank you very much, 4AS. And to all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a MysterE.